Professor T.S. Prahlad, and other dignitaries who are watching this video off the line and on the inline. I welcome you all for the second session of today's program, Professor Satish Dhawan Birth Centenary Program. Professor Satish Dhawan, who was the chairman of ISRO from 1972 to 1984, took birth in the year of 1920 on 25th September. Today being the birth centenary of Professor Dhawan, Department of Space joining the nation to pay tributes to the great teacher, visionary, and kind-hearted personality. Professor Dhawan was regarded as father of experimental fluid dynamics research in India. Now may I request the dignitaries to offer floral tributes to Professor Dhawan's portrait. Thanks one and all for paying the tributes. ISRO has made a small documentary on Professor Dhawan life story as well as his vision. We would like to present a small video.
The man who shaped the Indian space program, Professor Dhawan, was a passionate teacher, a demanding research guide, and a pragmatic engineer, known as the father of experimental fluid dynamics research in India. Satish was born on September 25, 1920 in Srinagar, Kashmir. His parents came from professional families, and his father, Devi Dayal, retired as a respected judge of the High Court in Lahore, now in Pakistan. Satish graduated from the University of Lahore with an unusual combination of degrees, a BA in Physics and Mathematics 1938, an MA in English Literature 1941, and a BE with honours in Mechanical Engineering 1945. In 1946, he travelled on a government scholarship to the United States, where he obtained an MS from the University of Minnesota 1947 and then an MS in Aeronautical Engineering 1949 and a PhD in Aeronautics and Mathematics 1951 at the California Institute of Technology, Caltech, USA, under Professor Hans V. Leibman. Professor Dhawan left the United States in 1951 to join the Indian Institute of Science as a scientific officer. He rose rapidly to become professor and head of the Department of Aeronautical Engineering in 1955 and in 1962 director of the institute. An IISc director from 1962 to 1981, Dhawan devoted much time to the establishment of a number of new scientific programs. Dhawan was on a well-earned sabbatical at Caltech in 1971-1972 when he was called upon to take over India's fledgling space program after its visionary founder Vikram Sarabhai passed away at an early age. Although India's space program owes its birth to the vision of Vikram Sarabhai, it was Dhawan who lent substance to his vision and built ISRO into the world-class body that it is today.
Considering the problems of India and the fact that it's only the application of science and technology which can resolve them, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, a great scientist and imaginative leader, considered how advanced science and technology could be applied for developmental purposes. One of the projects which he conceived of sometime in 1967 was to see if satellite communications can assist the development of our country. He proposed that we use this new technology of mass communications for broadly educational and developmental purposes for specially directed areas of our country.
Dhawan agreed, and a new structure was set up involving a policy-making space commission, an administrative arm of the government called the Department of Space, and a science and technology agency called the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, all three headed by one person. Thus began a parallel career track for Dhawan, who continued to be the director of IISc at Bangalore. He convinced the government that this arrangement would bring synergy to the space program. On a token salary of 1 rupee per month, he became the chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, and the chairman of the Indian Space Commission in the year 1972 and continued up to 1984. His major scientific and technical contribution to the space programs are Operational Multipurpose Indian National Satellite Project, INSAT, National Natural Resources Management System, NNRMS, and Final Configuration of India's Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, PSLV, the dependable workhorse of ISRO.
Two new projects, the Advanced Launch Vehicle or the Augmented SLV and the Polar Launch Vehicle. The first of these will launch about 150 kilograms into orbit. The PSLV, which is really a large one, will be able to place about 1,000 kilograms into sun-synchronous orbit. The time frames are roughly 84 and 85 for the augmented vehicle and hopefully 88 for the PSLV.
Dhawan's list of accolades include Distinguished Alumni Award in 1969 from Caltech and an IISc Distinguished Alumni Award in 1981. He was elected to the Indian Academy of Sciences in 1970 and served as its president during 1977 to 1979. In 1978, he was elected to both the US National Academy of Engineering and the Indian National Science Academy. He became a foreign honorary member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1972. India honored him with the Padma Bhushan in 1971, Padma Vibhushan 1981, the Indira Gandhi Award for National Integration 1999, acknowledging him as one of our foremost scientists, teachers and national builders who is deeply concerned with the solution of national problems through the use of science. He received several honorary doctorates, including one from the Cranfield Institute of Technology, United Kingdom. Following his death, the Spaceport of India at Shar, Sriharikota, Andhra Pradesh, was renamed as the Satish Dhawan Space Centre, Shar.
Thanks everybody for paying the attention to this small video, even though it's an iota of the entire contribution done by Professor Dhawan. We'll move on to the regular agenda of today's function. May I request Mr. Uma Maheshwaran, Scientific Secretary, to deliver the welcome address. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon to all. So welcome back for some of the people who attended the morning meeting, and welcome once again for yet another celebration today, the birth centenary of Professor Satish Dhawan. If we revere Dr. Sarabhai as father of our Indian space program, then we were also blessed to have a legendary person who took over the mantle from Dr. Sarabhai and shaped India's space program. It is none other than our beloved former secretary, Professor Satish Dhawan, who we remember as the architect of present Indian space program. He laid down the roadmap for making the dreams of Dr. Sarabhai come true. It is indeed a blessed coincidence that both the birth centenary of Dr. Satish Dhawan is immediately following the birth centenary of Dr. Sarabhai. Dr. Satish Dhawan is known as an extraordinary institution builder and a man of progressive values. As Dr. Kalam very often quoted, he took responsibility for a failure, but let others take the credit for the success. To quote Sri Jairam Ramesh, Member of Parliament, Dr. Professor Satish Dhawan was a mentor, not a tormentor. So in this very solemn occasion, I take the privilege of welcoming the dignitaries present with us to add special charisma to the event by sharing their inimitable experience with Professor Dhawan. First and foremost, pranams and sincere thanks to our beloved Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi ji for his very significant and valuable message on this August occasion. All of us are honored, sir, and we are all eagerly waiting to listen to your message. Dr. K. Kasturi Rangan, former Secretary, Department of Space, and present Chancellor of Central University of Rajasthan and NIIT University, is one of the designers of our space program, who nurtured the dreams of his predecessor by his exemplary technical contributions. He would be delivering today the Professor Satish Dhawan Memorial Lecture, which would give us and the younger generation a glimpse of the kind of administration and vision given by Professor Dhawan. We warmly welcome you, sir, for today's function. Also, our beloved Secretary, Department of Space and Chairman ISRO, Dr. K. Shivan, who is also the Chairman of Space Commission, would be delivering this presidential address. Dr. Shivan is one amongst the blessed people of ISRO who got an opportunity to work under the guidance of Dr. Dhawan. We welcome you, sir, to this inaugural ceremony, and we are eager to listen from you about your experiences. We also have with us very distinguished guest, representing the aerospace sector who had really distinctive association with Dr. Dhawan, where Dr. Dhawan played the role of Dronacharya. Firstly, Professor Rotham Narasimha, presently DST Year of Science Professor at Jawaharlal Nehru Center of Advanced Scientific Research, Bengaluru, and former Professor at Department of Aerospace, IISc. He was one of the Dhawan's earliest students, as I understand. I believe that this was the most blissful experience for him, and we are lucky enough to hear such a first-hand experience directly from one of Dr. Dhawan's students. A very warm welcome to you, sir. Professor T.S. Prahlad, a specialist in aerodynamics and aerospace design, is also former director NAL. Dr. Prasad was also student of Dr. Dhawan at IISc and was associated with ISRO during the SLV period. He is with us here to share his memories with Dr. Dhawan as a student as well as an employee of ISRO. I know that, sir, you are in the US and it's very late today. Our heartfelt welcome to you, sir. The event would surely be incomplete if you don't hear from the proud members of Dr. Dhawan's family. To bring in this completeness, we have with us Dr. Jyotsna Dhawan, daughter of Professor Dhawan, who is a coveted Indian cell and developmental biologist, who will be sharing her memories with us, of course. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Jyotsna Dhawan. Sri A.S. Kiran Kumar, former Secretary DOS and Chairman ISRO, is also a part of this program, and I wholeheartedly welcome you, sir. Dr. B.N. Suresh, as I mentioned in the morning also, is an omnipresent guiding light to all our activities. A very warm welcome to you, sir. I also welcome the Center Directors of ISRO, who are also with us today. And on behalf of the organizers, I extend a very warm welcome to all my dear colleagues from Department of Space, ISRO, and others who are participating in this virtual event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Sivan, Secretary, Department of Space and Chairman ISRO, has got a lot of similarity or commonalities with Professor Dhawan. He is also from the fraternity of aerospace engineering. He is an alumni of IISc and joined the PSLV project, which was originally configured and finally configured by Professor Dhawan. I request you, sir, to deliver the presidential address.
Respected Honorable Prime Minister of India, Sri Narendra Modi ji, respected Kasturangan sir, Professor Rotham Narasimha, Professor Prahlad, Dr. Jyotsna Dhawan, my friends from ISRO and my colleagues from ISRO, a very good afternoon to all of you. Let me first express my sincere gratitude to Honorable Prime Minister of India for sparing his valuable time to give an address this esteemed gathering through his valuable message. Today, we are here to celebrate the birth centenary of one of the greatest ISRO luminaries who was responsible for giving shape to the vision of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai on how the space program should be organized and conducted. Professor Satish Dhawan stands as one of the tallest stalwarts in shaping the future of not only ISRO, but also the Indian Institute of Science. If you talk about the growth of space program in India and how ISRO transformed from an experimental space agency in the 1960s and 70s to an operational space agency in the late 90s and early 2000, the major factor has been how the space programs have been linked to the national requirements and how the space program has been organized within Department of Space and ISRO. Professor Dhawan realized that for ISRO to grow and to deliver on its potential, it was necessary to redefine itself within the government. For this, he brought ISRO under the government of India and created the Department of Space. He also realized that a different structure for functioning of this new department was essential. He created the Policy Making Space Commission along with the financial powers under the Prime Minister. It was Professor Dhawan who emphasized that the offices of Chairman ISRO, Chairman of Space Commission, and Secretary Department of Space should be headed by a single person for ensuring effective integration of conceptualization and funding of the ISRO program. He also set up ISRO headquarters for the purpose of linking ISRO programs and projects with decision makers. This particular architecture that Professor Dhawan designed was original and innovative. ISRO's continuing success is visible proof of this robustness of this design. When Professor Dhawan took the charge at that time, activities at Vikram Sarabhai Space Center were fragmented with different groups working independently on a variety of problems and projects, some of them even competing with each other. He brought in Dr. Brahma Prakash and gave him a mandate to restructure VSSC into a dynamic structure capable of producing results repeatedly. Segregation of projects and system development agencies happened during this period, and VSSC was transformed into a great technology center and later became the mother center for many ISRO centers. From the beginning, Professor Dhawan insisted on a significant role for indigenous industry in the projects of ISRO. Today, hundreds of industrial units, both in the public and private sector, manufacture a wide range of space quality hardware for ISRO. All of this resulted in ISRO not only delivering on the satellite, launch vehicle, and space application front, but ISRO also successfully executed a series of space science missions like Chandrayaan-1, Mars Orbiter mission, as well as Astrosat mission. These missions have yielded path-breaking results of great scientific value. Professor Satish Dhawan birth centenary celebration is coming at a time when India, the various stakeholders, entrepreneurs, and investors are eagerly looking at new opportunities in space business. In the recent space sector reforms, for unlocking the potential of space sector in the India is a fitting tribute to Professor Satish Dhawan in formalizing a mechanism which allows new entrants to play a role in the space sector. In summary, the future is exciting. ISRO has great projects in the pipeline. Private sector will bring greater diversity to the space industry, leading to expansion. I once again thank you all for being here in paying tribute to Professor Satish Dhawan and in supporting, encouraging, and guiding ISRO in all its endeavors. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for great nice notes. Dr. Kasturangan is one of the earlier scientists of ISRO recruited by Dr. Sarabhai and continued with Professor Dhawan in his career. He is one who had a longest association with Professor Dhawan from the day one in ISRO. It is not possible to find out anybody else other than Dr. Kasturangan to deliver the Vikram Sarabhai, the Satish Dhawan Memorial Lecture. May I request you, sir, to take over.
Thank you. First of all, I should express how privileged I am to be a part of this deliberations today, celebrating the birth centenary of one of the most illustrious leaders in science and technology that this country has seen in the recent times, and whom we were privileged to have as the chairman of ISRO for more than a decade. And I'm really privileged additionally because of the fact that Dr. Shivan told me to share this forum where the Prime Minister is also giving his address. And I'm aware of the tremendous interest the Prime Minister has expressed at all times. When he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, now he's the Prime Minister of India, but his interest in his space, his interest in promoting space and its usefulness among the society is something which is unparalleled. So it's natural that today we are going to hear from the Honorable Prime Minister some of his own perceptions about how the space will take India into the 21st century and play its own rightful role. I'd like to thank the chairman, Dr. Shivan, for this very unique opportunity that he has extended to me. And I'm also honored that I'm speaking in the company of people like Professor Narasimha, Dr. Josna Dhawan, Dr. Prahlad, and also my other colleagues like Dr. Kiran Kumar, Suresh, and many others from the ISRO community. So thank you very much for this thing. I cannot start a little the narration about Professor Dhawan without again recapitulating the kind of academic credentials that he has, because it's so unique. And I've not seen that kind of a thing with many people whom I have come across. And therefore, I just want to, even at the expense of repeating what has already been said in the video, I will say he had a very distinguished and an unusual academic career. He had a BA in physics and mathematics, as was mentioned, a Master of Arts in English Literature, a BE in Mechanical Engineers, BE Honours with Mechanical Engineering, then MA in Aeronautics, PhD in Aeronautics and Mathematics from Caltech, a student of being a student of Professor Hans Liebman, who was a student of Professor Theodor von Karman. So you can see the lineage of Professor Dhawan in terms of aeronautics, the father of American aeronautics, and he is the father of Indian aeronautics. So there is the extraordinary journey in academic career that Professor Dhawan had. This translates into many multifaceted personality that he was: a lovable teacher, an intense researcher, an innovative technologist, an able institution builder, and an excellent administrator, academic administrator, all at the same time, but yet distinctly visible. To me, above all this, he was an extraordinary strategist who had the ability to look at a complex problem at the nitty-gritty level, somebody who could really probe and probe and probe deeper and deeper into a problem, dissect it, examine the multiple options leading to an optimal solution. This is what he brought to bear very effectively to address ISRO's unique issues. And many of us, to the extent possible, learned out of this methodology something which proved to be very, very effective and useful in our later years. Among other things, the type of leadership that Professor Dhawan gave to ISRO was one of absolute delegation to ensure appropriate empowerment at different levels, unambiguous way of identifying accountability, insistence of high level of transparency, and ethical principles in context of individual responsibilities. These were a part of a culture that ISRO has imbibed, thanks to Professor Dhawan, his outlook on these matters of individual responsibilities, how we used to do this. And I want to say, with respect to the leadership and the extraordinary that he gave and absolute delegation, I only recall that when he was asked to chair the Aryabhatta project, the only project where he chaired the management board, he never chaired any of the boards of ISRO, any of the councils of ISRO, any of the management, other type of structures in ISRO. He was always the chairman of ISRO. Only in Aryabhatta, very reluctantly accepted this, because he said that this will be the first milestone for ISRO to demonstrate India's prowess in space. And maybe it would be appropriate that I have a visibility virtually on a continuing basis, and therefore I could chair this particular board. But I'm not setting any precedents in this. And true to his words, in the rest of the decade, he never accepted any position in ISRO other than being the chairman of ISRO. Very extraordinary, and his conviction and approach to dealing with management. I would like to go now into the major things that there's a very long list of things that Professor Dhawan did in his 12 years as chairman of ISRO. I am going to give you a little bit of the whole thing simply because of the fact that shows the breadth and depth of the things that happened during the period of 12 years, number one. And second, this was the period where ISRO was just getting a fledgling, as was rightly put, into an organization which was fledgling. It needed stabilization, it needed to bring sustainability, and therefore the structuring that we need to do, the activity that need to be initiated, and the accountability that we need to bring in into the kind of activity that we were undertaking, they were all critical. So he addressed the multiple dimensions of ISRO: science, technology development, use of space for applications, institutional mechanism to achieve the goals, as well as the infrastructure that need to be built parallelly to make sure that we have the necessary ability to carry out the space program through both internal infrastructure creation as well as the work with industries and other institutions in the country. On the science he promoted, he strongly believed that science is one of the key elements to promote this kind of activities, which may be high technology, which may have a lot of application oriented, but science always demands high level of thinking, high level of technology, sophistication, perfection. These kind of things, if we embed it into the mainstream of the program, it can make a lot of difference. So science cannot be devolved from the rest of the activities in space. He supported the programs of atmospheric sciences, solar system studies, astronomy, it was mentioned about it. And in fact, with these initiatives on astronomy, the one that gave us the world famous observatory today, the AstroSat, establishment of major ground facilities and laboratories, SSPL and things of that kind, continuing support for rocket flights from Cuba to understand the upper atmospheric region about the geomagnetic equator, conducting flying instrumentation with balloons, and also with satellite-based sciences. So this was a very broad agenda he supported for science. On technology, of course, one of the important things that Sarabhai had left was the SLV-3 development, the first stage vehicle. Sarabhai and both Professor Dhawan both believe that in autonomous access to space is extremely critical for a country like India. We can build satellites. If we get stuck up just because we don't have an agreement to launch it, then we are in trouble in conducting space. So autonomy in space, autonomic access in space was one of the critical aspects of the policy of ISRO. Fructification of SLV-3 was very critical in this. He, together with Dr. Kalam and other senior engineers of ISRO, fructified SLV-3 as India's demonstrated capability in understanding how to access space in an autonomous way. This, of course, led to the ASLV. Professor Dhawan himself beautifully explained what that ASLV derivative from SLV is. And then it led to the configurational aspects of a more operational vehicle, an operational vehicle that can put a remote sensing satellite into polar orbit, or a geosynchronous satellite, or communication and broadcasting into a geosynchronous transfer orbit, which is the GSLV. Both of them, the study of configurational aspects, optimality of the configurational aspects, the capability that they should have, they were all defined to fairly high level of detail during the time when he was the chairman. And of course, he started the programs following the Aryabhatta, which is the first satellite that was built under his supervision. As I told you, was the chairman of the Aryabhatta Management Board. He also continued that program through Bhaskara, an experimental remote sensing satellite, Apple, an experimental communication satellite, and also initiating the work with companies abroad to bring in an operational capability into multi-purpose remote sensing, multi-purpose communication and broadcasting through the INSAT-1 system, even as we started laying the groundwork for the second generation INSAT system, as well as building an operational remote sensing. So these were all serious matters, which today, if we say that how ISRO is able to carry on a sustainable basis with certain missions like INSAT and IRS, the foundations of these were laid during the time when he did the experimental systems. He, from a proof of concept, he went into an experimental system like Bhaskara and Apple. From an experimental system, he went into an operational. It was a 3 to 4 step process, very carefully planned and exceptionally well executed, with appropriate inputs in terms of infrastructure and resources, which were built to the requirement at that particular point. So this is a very, very significant aspect of the way he planned and managed ISRO in those critical years. Of course, he recognized the importance of application. Both he and Sarabhai were very much, they realized very much the importance of the applications with respect to the space. Ultimately, such large investments, high-risk area can never be satisfied in this country unless there are tangible outcomes that are applicable to grassroots level requirements or development. And that is where the experiments like the satellite instructional television experiment, where we demonstrated the capability of a system like satellite for communication and developmental communication. In particular, application of Apple and experimental satellite, with which you show what type of communication systems on a space-based satellite could really enable use of Landsat data, the American satellite, which just came into being. So they was realized to be a very critical element of the first step to use remote sensing data for several of the resource application, timely, precise, and accurate applications with respect to the resource management, and ultimately also to move, in the case of remote sensing, to a more operational system, which you call it the Indian remote sensing satellite. So he laid the groundwork for the Indian remote sensing. What is the groundwork? That shows the level to which he plans. He made sure that if we want to define an Indian remote sensing satellite, we have to look at all the aspects. One is the technology. The second is the camera system, which has to be state-of-the-art, because an operational satellite has become comparable with the best satellites in the world at that time to the French and the Americans. And then there is a question of a set of utilization. And if we want to have the utilization, the camera system to be able to produce that kind of data. So to study the efficacy of camera system, the type of definition of a camera system, its configuration, these were a part and parcel of a planning process, which you call the joint experimental projects, which he initiated with the user community in the country, whether it's forestry, agriculture, oceanography, coastal region, environment, and things of that kind. So these evaluations were carried out. Extraordinary set of precursors which he initiated gave the basis for laying down what an Indian remote sensing satellite would be. And you can see the success of India's remote sensing satellite program, the IRS program, from those days, because he laid the type of foundation that was very much needed. It had to be understood and then evaluated and correspondingly built up. This is exactly what he did. And today, we really take advantage of that kind of a methodology and the kind of basis that he laid down for India's remote sensing program, which has made our country a leader in this particular area. He realized that running space program cannot be an isolated effort in this country. You need to have the stakeholders and they need to be brought together. They should be consulted. They should be made to even define what they are looking for. And we convert those definitions into actual configurations and missions. So he wanted to make sure that this is an end-to-end effort. So created systems like I heard earlier with respect to the constitution of the Space Commission, a very critical higher level decision-making body, which does away with the inelastic rules that were prevalent for typical government departments. And he also wanted to make sure that it comes under the Prime Minister, because the extensive influence the space will have with different machineries in the government, different departments of the government. So he wanted to make sure under Prime Minister, this Space Commission was constituted. It was a single window decision-making system, whether it's technology, missions, finances, infrastructure, policies. I think they were all ultimately taken at this single one, where the chairman of the ISRO himself was the chairman of the Space Commission. And then there are other institutional mechanisms. How do we propagate, for example, the communication, and how do you make sure that the users are fully aware of what we are trying to do as a space communication system? How does it further improve their own capability? This is one aspect. Similarly, this Indian INSAT communication, INSAT, the coordination committee, ICC was one of them. NNRM, Natural Resource Management System, preparatory committee, and later on planning committee was formed, and they looked up the remote sensing with the various user agencies in the government, and then ultimately also to promote science. Science, he gave as much importance as applications. That course was an advisory committee on where some of the very leading scientists of the country were a part of defining what the space missions in science has to be. So that's the kind of a thing. And he continued to create this infrastructure that was needed. SHAR, which was just initiated by Sarabhai, became a full-fledged center during his time as a Sriharikota Center. Today it is Satish Dhawan Center, named to honor his own role in the ISRO. ISAC was another such example. The Space Application Center is the third example. The National Resource, NRC, is the other kind of example. So these were all the part of a major milestones on which he worked. But what is significant about this entire effort? This was the first time from a very, very experimental level of Sarabhai where he left it with a vision. He converted it into a kind of a system which became sustainable and operational. So that is where his role was with respect to this. In doing this, I said that he is one of the finest strategists that I've seen, from whom I have learned a little bit. The strategy that he had, he never wanted to make sure that we are stuck up for a technology just because we took our development of a technology, went up to a particular point, then we find that we are not able to take it further. And therefore, that particular whole program is held up. This is typical of high technology systems, and not only in this country, elsewhere. So he had this concept of a buy build option. You want to make sure that early in the planning of a particular mission, however complex it may be, make sure that you have an option in case you fail to deliver the internal capability in terms of a hardware or a software. You should have an option to deal with it with an external support. So that is one thing that we all had to study and make sure. One of the reasons why ISRO was able to meet many of the very good demanding missions was only because this strategy of build buy made sure that we could get over some of the difficulties by ensuring that we could go to other options. The other one was with respect to alliances. He was very conscious of the fact that India's expansion into space does need support from other countries, and wherever friendly countries are willing to give. USSR and Aryabhatta is a classic example. Later it became cryogenic and things of that kind. European Space Agency is another. With USA, they had a tremendous relation with respect to NASA, NOAA, and other kind of institutions. These were all opportunities where we took full advantage of a cooperative framework in trying to push India's program with both cost-effective, time-effective, and in terms of technology, we get a little better in terms of the level at which we can operate. And then, of course, there was a question of human resources. I want to talk something about the human spaceflight because it gives an insight into the mind of Professor Dhawan. There was this time at the time when the Soviet Union wanted an Indian cosmonaut to fly, and Rakesh Sharma finally flew, as you know. And there was this suggestion that India ISRO now take the responsibility of that particular mission working with the Soviet Union. It was at that time, Professor Dhawan's assessment was that we have a fairly committed program in social side with respect to applications and its utility at the grassroots level. We have other kinds of development to take place in launch vehicles and satellites. And with this kind of resources that are available, the infrastructure that we have built, we are just optimal at that particular point. In case we introduce a major program of the kind that we are talking of, he was very worried whether how do we try to marry these two and still make sure that the resources that are available, limited in nature, could still make sure that we could supply this. So this was something which he shared at the political level. And I think Madam Gandhi was convinced about the arguments. One of the places where, just to say how a technocrat, an influential technocrat, purely because of his rationale and conviction, could convince the highest in the political system to make sure that we don't take up certain things just because that is there to be given to us. And he made sure that we work with the defense. And finally, this was a program in which defense conducted the main thing, and ISRO supported it in its own way. This is just to give an example of the way he thought, and he used his thinking and the outcomes in discussing with the political system, and just to make sure that our own program at no time gets derailed simply because of this. So these are the kind of things we were watching, we were learning, and we were trying to really make sure that this is part and parcel of our own outlook in the subsequent years, which we learned. My project management is structure, strong involvement of industries. It was mentioned about it. I'm sure a lot of people will talk about this. These were all part and parcel of the way in which he knew the program has to really. We cannot have everything within the organization. The industry has to play a critical role, and he was one of the person who started in a big way the role of industry in the space program, which today, as Dr. Shivan has rightly mentioned, is moving towards a privatization strategy or industrialization strategy, which would be a major transformation to the important steps that he took for sustaining the program through the involvement of industries, educational institutions, academia, and things of that kind. Then, of course, he was very particular about everything that we do in terms of the perfection and whether we have addressed all the aspects in writing a project report. For example, when I was asked to write for the Indian Remote Sensing Satellite Project report, the amount of preparation we have to do, the amount of analysis we have to do, the amount of options that we have to study, and to be satisfied that he has to be satisfied with this. This is something which has really ingrained in my mind now, because I remember distinctly the days in which I used to be virtually afraid to get a call from him, because if he talks to you for 4 minutes, you can be sure that next 4 days you are busy with analysis of that kind of a thing. That is the level at which he was trying to do. And he, of course, gave us very beautiful ways in which the decision can be taken, multiple options. Look at the multiple option. You choose the optimal option, not the best option. These are all the things that we imbibe from him, and to the extent possible, we could even practice it in the subsequent years. In a nutshell, to me, Professor Dhawan was an extraordinary individual, a philosopher, guide, and a mentor. I can conclude this by only telling that when I was assigned the job of being the chairman of ISRO, I felt into his room to pay my respects and seek his blessings. And when I went there, he said only one thing. He said, I have got to say only two things, Rangan, as chairman ISRO. First thing I would like to say is, you should remember that the buck stops on your table. So, which essentially means don't tug your responsibility. The buck stops on your table. The second, give a damn to your chair. In case you have to make decisions which are unpalatable and you are convinced about it, please go ahead and do it and give a damn to the chair, which essentially means you should be willing to quit on those principles. These are the two things. By and large, I think in the 10 years that I had the privilege of being a part of this organization at the highest level, I think whenever such situations arose, first and foremost, I used to think is how will Professor Dhawan look at it and how will he think about it? And that guided me to the maximum extent how I acted over the subsequent years as chairman of ISRO in other roles. And I think I owe much to him for what I am. If Sarabhai created a certain sense of confidence and relevance for me on this earth, it is Professor Dhawan who defined what that was about. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, sir, for exemplary and extempore talk. I think that shows your commitment and association with the Professor Dhawan. And each and every word of such is the Professor Dhawan's life is by itself is a book. Thanks for you have covered in a nutshell the 12 years of his stay in 4 slides and 20 minutes. Thanks a lot for you, sir. We have 3 special guests today from IISc and NAL, and one professor and one from Professor Dhawan's family to share their association with Professor Dhawan. Even though many people who associated with Professor Dhawan were available, because of the pandemic situation, we have to restrict ourselves because it is a webinar. So Professor Rodam Narasimha is an aerospace scientist and fluid dynamics specialist, worked with Professor Dhawan at IISc. He was also a chairman of the NAL, contributed significantly to the aerospace development in the country. He has been expert in several technical committees of ISRO. In fact, we have a lot of association with Rodam Narasimha sir for all many projects in the aerodynamic systems, aeroacoustics studies, etc., for the advanced launch vehicles. May I request Professor Rodam Narasimha sir to deliver the address.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Thank you very much, Dr. Sivan, for inviting me to this meeting about the centenary celebration of Professor Satish Dhawan. This session, for the 3 of us, emphasizes our association with Professor Dhawan. So that's what really I will largely talk about. And as it was mentioned in the introduction, I worked for projects in ISRO, and I've been on those committees. And in fact, I even worked for ISRO before Professor Dhawan became its chairman in Sarabhai's days, in Vikram Sarabhai's days. And I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. I was, like Professor Dhawan's last degree, which was actually in mechanical engineering. I was a mechanical engineer, and that's the only degree I had at that time at the Bangalore University College. And I did it in mechanical engineering, and I'd seen once, during those years I spent in that engineering college, on a visit to the Institute of Science, an old Second World War Spitfire parked in the quadrangle. And somehow it caught my fancy and attention because it had beautiful, mathematically designed elliptic wings. And we all know that it actually saved Britain during the Second World War. And I said, well, this is something very interesting. I don't know anything about it. I must really do aeronautics. So that I made up my mind right there. Well, 2 years passed by and I applied. But at that time, aeronautics was actually not very popular, partly because there were no jobs easily. In fact, the previous batches had been 0 or 1 or 2 members in the Indian Institute of Science, in the Department of Aeronautical Engineering. Well, anyway, I went there. Many people tried to get me out of there, and they said, "Why don't you go to Burma Shell or Caltex and so on?" I said, "I'm not interested." So anyway, I joined the department, and the first thing that struck me on the campus of the institute, and in particular on the very first day that the term started, was the following. The first lecture that I heard after I joined as a student was that given by Professor Satish Dhawan. He was not a professor at that time. Actually, he had just become an assistant professor. Now, he had at that time an MG sports car, and his dress and his manners were totally different from that of the faculty and generally the way that in the Indian Institute of Science there things were done. So I remember the first visit, he came in that car, jumped across the door. Then at the institute, in the Department of Aeronautical Engineering, you had to go up the stairs as you came in at the entrance. There was a staircase. It covered an old wind tunnel. And then you came down the steps to the lecture hall. And that's where the lecture was given. And Dhawan was still so, what's the word for it? So athletic or so rapid about it. He ran up the steps, walked over a few ones and ran down the steps, opened the door and said, "Good morning to you," with a big smile on his face. This was something which the students had never been used to. In fact, not only in the aero department, but in most other departments on the campus, faculty were very formal and usually not easily people whom you could communicate with. And the other people who taught us various subjects in the department were all very serious like that. So Dhawan stood out. He actually stood out not only in the aero faculty, but he quickly became a star. He didn't wear a coat and tie. He wore a colored shirt, and as I said, did not hesitate to run up and down the stairs. Well, anyway, joined the subject at that time, the popular subject at that time. He had actually just come back from the United States 2 years earlier, during which he survived. Survived is not the word. He served the Indian Institute of Science as a senior scientific officer, and he had just become an assistant professor actually. So the thing that he wanted to do, he wanted to do things which are already modern, things he wanted to introduce us to things that were of interest in the United States at that time. And the big thing in aerodynamics in the US at that time was about supersonic aerodynamics, namely vehicles or velocities which are greater than the speed of sound. Well, this was still a big attraction in India and in Bangalore, because it seemed so different from what they'd been used to. And really not many people understood what supersonic dynamics was about. And Dhawan was actually an excellent teacher, and he knew what he should do to get students to take interest in it. So he said, well, they will not know about shock waves, they will not know about supersonic tunnels and supersonic speeds and so on. So he made an experiment. He built this thing which you see, on the slide there up above. It's actually a supersonic tunnel. It's a handheld supersonic tunnel. It's a circumference. I could hold it in my hand like this, and it had a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter test section, and it had a Mach number of 2.3. It could be changed if you wanted, and it got its drive from two old oxygen tanks belonging to DC, the Dakota, so to speak, and he bought those tanks, filled them up from the compressor with high pressure air, and then by adjusting these things, he also made a visualization mechanism there. There's actually what's called Schlieren. So he put everything in and would ask the students, come and take a look at supersonic flow here. You see that line there? That's the shock wave at the leading edge of this body. I must tell you incidentally that this has been reversed, left to right. What is left to right in the top photograph is right to left in the bottom photograph. So the flow comes in and hits the body, and there are shock waves like this. And well, actually, although it seems reversed, it's not actually reversed. It was a photograph taken there. So you can see how the shock waves are generated at the leading edge. They hit the wall, they come back, hit the plate itself. There's the flat plate there, hit the wall, and so on. He loved making these experiments. And he was known already at Caltech, an extraordinary person in making experiments. May I go to the next one? Well, yeah, no, don't worry about this. Switch it off. So he taught by experiment, so they could see what the real things were. He was a serious teacher, made many pretty experiments, and if there was anybody who showed any interest in experiments, he would usually sort of, get him involved in doing some research as well. Well, I was one of those who actually started helping him. He asked me, can you come and help me? So I said, well, I would be delighted. So I went there and helped him with not only these two tunnels, this tunnel, but also a much bigger one. Not much bigger one. One was 1 inch by 3 inch, the other one was 5 inch by 7 inch. So while I was taking my courses, I was also helping him along in this thing, and we got to know each other very well. And one thing I understood quickly from Professor Dhawan was that he wanted to be seen, and he was actually, a person who had no prejudices about anybody, independent of the religion, caste, whatever. And so he didn't like it if somebody said, well, he's such and such, therefore he must be bright or something. He did not see that was that was an important thing. Well, for example, you take turbulent flows. Turbulent flows are very common. You can see them easily in the skies, at home, or of course in an aerodynamics lab. And turbulent flow is characterized by the fact that the mean velocity of the flow has a strongly imposed fluctuational component. And the problem of turbulence had not been solved then and has not been solved today. It may come as a surprise to people, but it's actually the truth. So the problem of turbulence is not a problem only in aerodynamics. It is, of course, a serious problem in aerodynamics, but it's also a problem in physics and in mathematics. And neither physicists nor mathematicians nor fluid dynamicists have yet been able to sort this problem out. So turbulence had to be measured, the fluctuations had to be measured by what we call hot wire probes, very thin wires, 2 or 3 micron wires, about 0.5 millimeter long, stuck across 2 needles. Well, he asked me to do some research on turbulent flow. So I said, okay, this is the way to do it. And so you have to make these hot wire probes. Sit down here, I'll show you how to make it. So I sat next to him. And then he would make those, and you had to solder those wires to those needles. All of that, such small dimensions. But he was, of course, an expert at doing it. And he showed me all of that. And And he had to get the wires from his friends in Caltech. They were not available in India. Then he said, you know, Narasimha, you must do this like puja. Every detail is very important here. So you please understand that this is exactly something where your attention is greatly needed. Well, we had another well-known fluid dynamicist in the department, and that was the head of the department. He was a German, Oscar Tietjens. He was a student of the famous, celebrated fluid dynamicist in Germany, Ludwig Prandtl, who actually solved many problems in fluid dynamics which had been unsolved at the time when he became a professor at Göttingen. So Göttingen and Tietjens had written books which were textbooks all over the world at that time. There were not too many books, actually, including in the United States. So it was translated into English and so on. So he also taught us flight mechanics, a bit like Dhawan. He wanted you to understand the fundamentals, but he didn't make experiments. So he was also there, but he wanted everybody in the classroom to understand what the fundamentals of fluid mechanics were. And so we went along, but he was otherwise a very nice gentleman. And well, at the end of 2 years, my master's degree course was over. And he once called me to his office and said, well, look, you've spent 2 years here now. What are you going to do next? Well, I said, I'm not yet quite sure what I'm doing next. I may go to, well, I gave him two alternatives. I may go, I said, to industry, or I may go to the meteorologist, because I like to see what happens in the atmosphere, in the clouds and so on. And he said, no, don't do it. That's what Tietjens said. You better go and do research. And if you want to do research, there are only two places in this world where you can do it. You should come either to Göttingen or you should go to Caltech. If you're coming to Göttingen, write to me. I'll make sure that you're admitted. That's what he said. But of course, Dhawan also came to me and said, okay, Narasimha, now you got your master's degree. What are you going to do? I told him again, I'm not made up my mind. And he said, all right, then let's sit down and do some research. So we started a research project. And I won't take you through it in great detail because we spent a lot of time together and so on. He had a problem of how non-turbulent flow goes to turbulent flow, laminar flow to turbulent flow, transition from laminar to turbulent. And that was our problem. At the time it started, it looked as if some things were known, but actually that also became a big controversy. And I'll not go into details at all. But just say that there was a theory about it at that time. It had not been supported by experiment. A couple of years later, it was supported by parts of it were supported by experiment. But the experiment, while it was very illuminating, did not, unfortunately, agree with the final mathematical conclusion of the author of the first paper. And I was amazed that here is a man who is a professor from Harvard. How come his result doesn't apply here? And it took me a few months to worry about it. Then I finally found out that the equation he had made for it was not quite right. I found out a way to correct it and went and showed it to Dhawan. And he said, well, that makes a lot of sense. What did you actually do? And I told him. And he said, why don't you write it up? So I wrote it up. I'd put his name too there. But just as with Kalam, he struck out his name and said, you send it. So it was published in the Journal of Aeronautical Sciences in the United States. Well, I can go on like this, but I think my time is nearly up. So what I want to say is, it was a great pleasure to work with him there. And then I went to the United States, and in the United States, well, the first thing, what happened in the very first week was a huge sensation. In fact, it had to do with space, because the Russians had claimed to have launched a Sputnik, a satellite, in the very first week, within the first 7 days or 10 days that I was there. The American press and American leadership did not believe it. They said, no, these people can't do it. They don't know much about supersonic flows. That's actually what the Americans said at that time. So they gave a table of whichever town you were in. Then if you turn to the horizon, you'll be able to see a small blot of red thing coming around there. And that is in fact the Sputnik. And the time at which it was announced for the day at which it would be seen in Pasadena, the campus at Caltech was filled with people from the utmost, from the president to the professors, all the academics, the students, and even the assistants and so on. They all wanted to see whether it was true or not. And of course, it turned out to be true. So, well, I can go on like that, but I think I should say a few words and stop there. He had certain principles, and I'd like to mention them. He had, first of all, great confidence in Indian talent. He thought, he behaved as if he knew that Indians had great talent. But I think, time's up. Okay, all right. So he had great faith in Indian talent, and so while he might make comments, he was pretty sure that it could be done. And as I think Dr. As Dr. Kasturirangan pointed out, he always made sure that he gave credit to anybody who made anybody else. Well, I think it's time I stop. I think my time is up. So his principle was, as I could see, his operational principle, that a scientific engineer who has to solve a problem for industry must be able to do the science of it. And so his problems are always fundamental level, so to speak, and because it really had not been solutions. And his method was ingenious in design, meticulousness in execution, and cautiousness in interpretation. He said, if you want to make an experiment and say that's correct, you better go through all of these. And I learned with this last one. Okay. You remember that there was this incident of Nambi Narayanan, and Dhawan, after he had retired, had an office in ISRO, and he decided that the time has come for him to say that this was an unjust action that the government had taken. And that was signed by actually many people, he and T.N. Seshan and others who were not officially in ISRO. But the most interesting thing was this. He called me and said, Narasimha, I want you to help me write this letter. So he had made a letter and said, take a look at it. Well, I was also a bit of a serious man with my students. So I went through it and made some changes. He looked at that and, yeah, thank you very much, he said. And then he said, can you please call up Mr. T.N. Seshan and read this letter to him and ask him whether he would sign it. I said, sir, he doesn't know me. How can I talk to him? He said, no, I want you to talk to him. So I called him up actually. Mr. Seshan, after this thing had been sent, you want to make this protest to the government, and Professor Dhawan has asked me whether you will be willing to sign this statement. He said, is Professor Dhawan going to sign that statement? I said, yes, of course. He said, if Professor Dhawan signs the statement, I don't need any more evidence. I will sign it. That was the respect that people had, that Dhawan would not say anything, not truth, anytime. And in fact, that appeared in Current Science. It had some effect. And so I was very happy when finally, recently, the problem seemed at last solved. So, I'll stop here. Thank you very much. I could go on like this, more about Satish Dhawan, but I think I must have taken somebody else's time. So please excuse me, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, sir. You have given the other part of Professor Dhawan. Very nice touch, Guru Shishya relationship, and the soft part of the Professor Dhawan. Very nice, sir.
Yes. Well, I did work for, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir, for your nice presentation with 1 or 2 slides. Exemplary, like a real professor you have talked. And especially this message should go to the young generations who do not know about Professor Dhawan. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you very much.
Now we will move on to Professor T.S. Prahalad, a true student of Professor Dhawan and well known in the area of aerodynamics and aerospace design. He worked in ISRO, VSSC ISRO, and contributed immensely for the launch vehicle project in SLV-3. Later, he moved to NAL as director and associated to the development of civil aircraft Sansa and Saras, and also light combat aircraft. Professor Prahalad is joining us from United States in spite of the odd schedules. Over to Dr. Prahalad.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank Dr. Shivan and Dr. Suresh for having given me this opportunity and for having invited me to participate in this function. It is an honor and a privilege. My association with Professor Dhawan extends for over 4 decades. As an ME student in Aeronautical Engineering in the Institute of Science, 61 to 63, then I was his PhD student, perhaps his last, when he was already the director of the institute, 63 to 70. As an engineer in Vikram Sarabhai Space Center, when he was the chairman, spanning over about 12 years. As a member of NAL's Research Council, when he was its chairman, and as a beneficiary of his advice and goodwill, when I was at RADA working on LCA, and when I was at NAL as its director. Professor Narasimha has already spoken about Dhawan as a teacher. He taught our batch aerodynamics and wind tunnel testing. He was an excellent teacher, always spoke about the physical aspects of the subject, very cheerful and friendly. His teaching material was very neatly prepared. He used to sort of distribute tables, charts, graphs, etc. And oral examination at the end of each semester, if he was there, it was always a pleasure because he used to ask very interesting and enjoyable questions. And we all enjoyed his presence in the department around us. My PhD with Professor Dhawan was on 3-dimensional turbulent boundary layers, where the boundary layer profile has both a streamwise component and a cross-flow component, and the skin friction has also 2 components. So my job was mainly an experimental study of this problem, creating a 3D field and doing this job. And he was a great help in the design of the instrumentation because he himself was very good with his hands. He used to walk with me to the workshop, give precise instructions to the mechanics, and it was a pleasure to see that. And one of the things I remember distinctly was his moral support during my father's illness. He was extremely supportive, and when my father passed away, he sent a very kind note. Then I will move on to my VSSC association. I think the details have been covered by Dr. Kasturi Rangan, and you also have seen a video. I joined VSSC ISRO in 1970 after completing my ME and PhD. Professor Dhawan took over as chairman ISRO in 1972, even while he was continuing as director of Indian Institute of Science. One of the first things he did was to restructure VSSC by bringing in the noted scientist Dr. Brahm Prakash. There's already been mentioned. And to me, this seems to be a very important decision because Dr. Brahm Prakash was very well respected within ISRO and outside ISRO, and he brought a certain coherence to all the activities of VSSC. The SLV3 project was the main project at that time, and it was being run as a in a fragmented fashion. And he identified a hands-on engineer, a hard-working hands-on engineer, Abdul Kalam, as the project director of SLV3 with his own project office and core project team, and gave him considerable authority under Director of VSSC. And he maintained a very close association with the project. And he used to interact with Dr. Kalam on various occasions. He used to even take down notes when Kalam was speaking. And he always projected Dr. Kalam, even with the Prime Minister, as the main force behind the project. One of the very important traditions Professor Dhawan established in ISRO was the peer review system, with experts drawn from ISRO, academia, industry, R&D labs, etc. Some of my friends had reservations. So how can somebody from outside come and understand what we are doing? But they soon began to appreciate its benefit. Now it's a cherished culture of ISRO. And the thing to remember is the 2 to 3 day review of SLV3 open to all engineers. Anybody can stand and ask a question or make an observation. And on some occasions, deeper late night reviews. One example I remember is the 60 trajectory optimization. This was being done by 3 different groups, and he patiently listened to all of them, left the final decision to Dr. Kalam. So here you could see the professor and the scientist in our chairman ISRO. Second lesson I learned was learning from failures. Just like in a complex project, SLV3 also had its problems and failures during technology proving. One such was the failure of the stage 1 nozzle during the static test at SHAR. The problem was complex. The design procedure was reviewed, and there were lots of subscale tests that were done in VSSC. So the question was how to use our own test data from the smaller nozzles to design a full-scale nozzle. What lesson we can learn from those tests? And I worked on this, and a reasonable 2-parameter family of curves was established based on Fourier number and Bio number. The delta C is the char depth thickness, delta is the initial layer thickness. So we could correlate all the data within plus minus 15%. When we presented this to Dr. Dhawan in the next review, he was happy. He liked such simple engineering approaches. And this also showed his leadership in managing and benefiting from failures. He was with Dr. Kalam throughout, up to the final launch date of SLV3. And this has been mentioned by many people, how the first launch he supported Dr. Kalam by coming to the front and taking responsibility for the failure, and how the successful second launch, he gave full credit to the team. For us, at the junior level, it was a great lesson to all of us because we were there on both occasions. Leadership transition is another impression that I formed. After successful launch of SLV3, Dr. Kalam was moved as Group Director, Aerospace Dynamics and Design Group. 3 younger people were put in charge of SLV3 continuation, ASLV and PSLV projects, and Dr. Kalam always being there as advisor. This management strategy to groom younger leadership and ensure smooth transition, this was a very good strategy. ISRO rarely has a problem with leadership and succession issues. This is also now a tradition in ISRO. New technology, Dr. Kasturiang has already mentioned. A prime example is the liquid propulsion engine for PSLV. So VSSA team worked with Tecma of France on Viking engine that was being developed for Ariane, and they came back and built a similar engine for PSLV. Similarly, the INSAT-1 series was with Ford Aerospace, INSAT-2 and beyond ISRO. Such kind of technology absorption can be a lesson for many other high technology programs in the country. PSLV configuration is another area in which I closely interact with him because he took a lot of interest in that. There were two competing configurations and we made many presentations. Professor Dhawan made his own careful analysis with the help of Dr. Kalam and his own team at ISRO. And this finally he selected the configuration that is shown here. This is a far-sighted vision because PSLV now is a very successful vehicle and is the workhorse of ISRO. We also used to pose some out-of-routine challenges once in a while. There was a mandate from Chairman ISRO's office in July 1979, predict the possible day and time of re-entry of Skylab into Earth's atmosphere. Skylab was coming down and everybody was nervous. I think we did a reasonable prediction. I think Professor Dhawan's purpose perhaps was to see how well we understood the re-entry dynamics. He knew that one day or the other, this will be required by ISRO. He also took a keen interest in the activities of the scientific groups. And he conducted a detailed review of aerospace dynamics and design group. And we had just then commissioned India's first blowdown hypersonic wind tunnel, for which Professor Dhawan had made a special sanction of rupees 2 lakhs with the condition that we should make the tunnel operational within 1 year. And once we did that, he brought the whole review team to the facilities. You can see everybody there, Professor Narasimha, Dr. Govarikar, Dr. Kalam, Dr. Velluri, and appreciated the work done. So thus it was fun to work with Professor Dhawan. My next association is as a member of the Research Council when he was the chairman, and his most notable contribution was to prod NIL to get into the civil aircraft development activities. He gave a mandate in the Research Council that NIL should do this. And he himself advocated that, made presentations, and supported the whole program. Thus were born two aircraft programs, the two-seater all-composite Hansa and the 14-seater light transport aircraft Saras. I was not there to see through this project and see the first flight. I had taken over as the director of NIL. So we wanted to create an occasion where we could remember Professor Dhawan. So the first thing that we did was to name the aircraft as VTXSD, that is the registration number, SD standing for Satish Dhawan. And the rollout of the aircraft took place in 4th February 2003. And we're very grateful that Mrs. Nalini Dhawan was present on the occasion. Dr. Mashelkar, Director, DG CSIR, gave a memento of the Saras model. So, Hansa and Saras, from the seeds sown by Professor Dhawan and nurtured with love, they are flying aircraft today. Concluding remarks, Professor Dhawan's contribution are manifold to IASC, ISRO, NIL, and in many other areas. As been repeatedly mentioned, he was an excellent teacher, inspiring guide, and great leader. Laid the foundation of experimental fluid mechanics in India, built up systems in IASC and ISRO that has served us well and have lasted.
Most important to me was Dhawan the person, charming, humane, meticulous, and very friendly with everybody around him. Thank you very much. We remember him with gratitude, affection, and respect.
Thank you very much, Prahlad sir. You have covered another dimension out of multiple dimensions Professor Dhawan had, both as a student and both as a co-employee of ISRO. Thanks a lot for your nice words for the next generation, sir. Now, Dr. Jyosna Dhawan, daughter of Professor Satish Dhawan, is an Indian cell and developmental biologist